Newcastle United is one of those special clubs in the Premier League that I think every fan outside of England has a really strong affinity with. It's a team that everyone loves to see do well, and since they've had this takeover recently, huge injection of cash, they've really captured everyone's imagination for what they can go on and do and really fulfill the long promised potential that Newcastle has had in the eyes of the Geordies and world football fans. And in the video today, it is report card time. Now that the season is completed, we can now look back on last season, now that we can call it that, as a complete entity. You know, how did Newcastle do? Did they underperform? Did they underachieve? Did they let the fans down? Or is this exactly where they should be? At any point in the video today, if you do laugh, you learn, you like something, or whatever, please do like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. On the channel, we love following European world football, managers, transfers, player moves, everything in between, and we're set for an absolutely massive summer when you sprinkle in all the international football that we've got to contend with as well. And yeah, let's just get stuck straight into it. Now, the first place we have to start is by looking at the season before, the 22-23 season. What position were Newcastle in coming into this season? To kind of give it a bit of context for, especially for Newcastle in particular, who are in a real transition phase, going from mid-table hopefuls to being a Champions League club, to being a top-of-the-table Premier League outfit. And really, when we look back at the 22-23 season, Newcastle's defensive record was definitely a key feature of their success, of their overachievement in that season, in the Geordies' own words, to finish fourth and to qualify for the Champions League ahead of Liverpool. But for me, the most incredible statistic from that season is Newcastle only lost 5 matches. Now, 14 draws, you would think would give you a lot of room for improvement to go and get some more victories in the following season, the 23-24 year, and improve upon the situation they're in at the moment, or even maintain it at the very least. But with only 68 goals scored, the defensive record has a lot of pressure on it, because Newcastle the season before weren't as free scoring as we would come to see them. And when we look at the 23-24 season, that is probably the main tangible area of improvement Newcastle have had from 22-23 into 23-24, as they've increased their goal output by a considerable percentage. That's now up at 85 goals scored. But where we've seen 14 draws and 5 losses, we now see 6 draws and 14 losses. And that is really the tale of Newcastle's season. Some really close games that just really didn't go their way. And although the goal scoring was free-flowing and Newcastle were definitely one of the most exciting teams to watch this year, they couldn't maintain that defensive solidarity they had the season before to build upon, the season they had. They finished in 7th, and I think every Newcastle fan that I come in contact with did not expect top 4. We're not demanding top 4 this year, but to qualify outside of European football for me is definitely a backward step. And when you compare where they were coming into this season, and we can talk about the individual transfers, the injury crises and stuff like that did happen for Newcastle that you really couldn't foresee and forecast, but Newcastle in a real position of strength, looking at the table, have made a real significant backward step. So this is a funny one, because I don't think Newcastle have dropped necessarily below expectations of the fans, certainly, but when you compare and contrast where they were and where they are, it is hard to give them a pass mark for this. It really does look like on the Premier League season 22-23 standings, we have to give Newcastle a hard fail. Drawing on points with Man United, who were calamitous this season, and, Chelsea, the comedy club, finishing 3 points ahead, pipping you on the last minute there to getting into 6th position and qualifying for European football. It just really does feel like overall the season has been a bit of a failure from where they were, having a summer and a January transfer window, and obviously Champions League football to boot, and to finish in 7th, it's definitely a failure of a year. And I think it is really epitomised very, very well in the Champions League campaign. Now, I actually forecasted Newcastle to finish 2nd in this group and qualifying for the knockout rounds of the Champions League, and it was so close to actually happening. It was a fantastic, Champions League, campaign, as it were, in a genuine group of death, where the Geordies had a lot of memorable moments for the good and for the bad. But I think, this is a nice kind of encapsulation of, Newcastle could fight with anyone this year. They could really take anyone to town. But ultimately, it just didn't amount to enough to get them over the line. Adding in the Champions League, and we'll come to look at the fixtures and the way the season shook out. There was a lot of hurdles for the manager to overcome, and we'll come to that in a separate section. But just to, I'm just trying to be quite clear in the fail that I'm giving here. Overall, the season, there's no progress been happened at Newcastle. They've went backwards from where they're at. There's no European football for next year. And, coming into this summer, they're in not a better place than where they were last summer. And if we have a look at the transfer business Newcastle did over this season in the January and in the summer transfer window, this is an area where, clubs will make or break their season. Can they get the right reinforcements in January? Do they build their team very well rounded and, coherently in the summer for the upcoming campaign? And if we start first of all with the departures, Newcastle managed to get some really big transfer fees in for players that, I don't know if Chris Wood would have played this season. Alan Saint-Maximin, I'm sure, could have been used in different segments, but I know he's a cult hero and a bit of a figure up there, but I don't think those two players would have made much of a difference to this year. Bringing in €44.5 million, essentially. Good bit of business. A lot of big wages coming off the books as well, with the likes of Ryan Fraser, Manquillo, who'd been there for so long, he's probably getting annual increases and stuff. Same with Kieran Clark, Matty Longstaff, Jeff Hendrick. These guys are, Isaac Hayden, these guys are on, I know that's loan transfers, but you're getting clubs to pay the loan. These are wages that you're having to carry. Jamal Lewis comes into this picture as well, going out on loan to Watford. So I don't feel that the squad has been diminished. It's not like Newcastle had to sell like a key talent from last year or a key figure like Bruno Guimaraes or Alexander Isak or anything like that. The incomings was where the imagination was captured and where we really start to think, how good could Newcastle be? And when they bring in Sandro Tonali for €64 million, AC Milan captain, just won the Scudetto, the next Pirlo, all that stuff goes around with him. You've got to think, wow, Newcastle mean business, and they're trying to get to that Champions League level with their best 11 sooner rather than later. Harvey Barnes, Tino Livramento, Lewis Hall, all these guys did contribute well throughout the season, and I think individually, all of them are great Premier League players that will add into this Newcastle team going through, for the future, because with all the way everything's structured FFP-wise, the transfer windows are crucial because you do need to get guys that you can really lock into the squad for an extended period of time. You can't churn and burn like 10, 12 players every summer and do all that kind of thing for FFP reasons and just general cohesion. We also see Lewis Miley transfer in kind of from the reserves or from the youth team, which, he was a nice rookie to see come through this year, which is great. But Newcastle spent in the summer 153 million. If we take away the 44 million they raised, that's a net spend of 100 million. And, when I was doing my, analysis of Newcastle round about the end of the transfer window in August coming into September, it was clearly obvious that, like, if anything did happen to the midfield or any of the strikers, that Newcastle were sitting on very shaky ground to be able to manage the amount of fixtures, the quality of performances they're going to have to demand from their players. And I don't think the transfer window was handled well at all. Even if Tonali was around all season long, I'm sure the season would have been better, don't get me wrong. But without Almiron, Gordon or Isak, like, there's really no attacking presence from the Newcastle squad. And, it's been very good fortune that, the injury crisis hasn't really got into the attackers this year. And I do feel that could have been way better handled with the transfer policies. Now, I don't want to give the transfer windows an out-and-out fail on this, because I do think Hall, Livramento and Barnes will already are very good signings. It's just the transfer fees and the timing of them, I just think, is so ill-placed. And Sandro Tonali, it's like we're jumping through a time loop because he's a new player. Again, the ban is up. He'll be able to play next season. So I don't want to give the window an out-and-out fail, but it is definitely not a pass. So I'm just going to give it like a B or whatever, basic business. Now, I don't think at any point of the season the Newcastle fixture list was kind or conducive to Eddie Howe's plans, being able to manage the squad and the injury crisis that did happen in the club. But the season got off to a real bang, beating Aston Villa by 5-1 before. Like I say, I don't think the fixture list ever got good for Newcastle. Playing City away, having Liverpool at home in quick succession after that, as you're trying to build in towards a Champions League campaign with the group of death. But even in the eye of the storm, when the Champions League group stages were on, and they were having to make up some serious ground in the Premier League after the loss to Brighton really did, drain that opening spell of the season. 3 points out of a possible 12 at that point. But when the going got tough, Newcastle got tougher. And, I know it's Sheffield and Burnley or whatever, but beating PSG 4-1, Palace 4-0, drawing with Wolves, beating Arsenal, in amongst, playing Champions League, playing midweek. You've got games with Borussia Dortmund there, beating Chelsea 4-1, then drawing with PSG, beating Man United. I was there for that game. It was electric. Great atmosphere at St James's Park. and that will live with me forever. And this is about the time where I was giving Eddie Howe, and I still give him ultimate credit, because I think the squad management here and how they were reading the game, because Newcastle started to develop their tactics this year from being like this 888 box-to-box midfield of Joe Linton, Bruno and Tonali. As soon as that started to have the wheels fall off on it, there was a lot of good adaptation to match up for your opponent and try and expose their weaknesses. And Newcastle got some valuable points. But as we've seen already, 3 losses in the first 4. And then when we come into this period here, losing 2-0 away to Bournemouth, 3-0 away to Everton. Tottenham were really good at this point of the year, but 4-1 won't sit well with anyone, I'm sure. Followed up quickly by losing to Luton and Nottingham Forest. These are the points of the season where you can't really hold it against Eddie Howe. I think he's done brilliant. You can't really hold it against the players that have actually played, because there's not that many of them. The bench is very thin, and we see throughout this period that Newcastle are making like 1 sub in the 89th minute, and it's Matt Ritchie and stuff like this, you know. So they're doing very well, but it does all stem back from that transfer window. But then after a bit of time, there's a wee bit of a winter break, no more Champions League football, and then, you know, away to Liverpool, at home to City, really does finish off the losing streak that Newcastle have been on for large segments of the year. And they go on a nice little run here where, you know, if you look statistically across the Premier League with the amount of losses Newcastle have accrued, I think once you get to like 13 losses, like nobody qualifies for Europe. It's very rare if that happens. So Newcastle were under a lot of pressure to stop losing matches for a very long period of time if they wanted to get back into European football. And for the longest time, I gave them the chances of doing it, and they gave them themselves every chance as well. Drawn 4 each with Luton and 2 each with Bournemouth, but these are 2 fixtures that really did cost Newcastle's season in a big way. That's 10 points left on the table against both of those teams. Now, I know Bournemouth's manager's been nominated for Manager of the Year and all the rest of it, but Newcastle should have been getting 6 points against both of those fixtures. Newcastle, Bournemouth and Newcastle, Luton, you know, both home and aways. Because losing away to Arsenal you can forgive. Losing marginally away to Chelsea, like that was Chelsea the comedy club, but you can somewhat forgive it, you know, for the most part. And then here, great results, great runs of form, beating Tottenham very convincingly. You know, Crystal Palace, the Ole Glasner wild card, you can kind of forgive that as long as you start to put away the rest of the teams, which Newcastle did. And then sadly, another comedy club have picked up points at Newcastle, Man United, right at the very end. And especially if we can look at some of the starting 11s that have played, especially over the last segment of the season, the Newcastle team had to be very tactically agile, like I've mentioned already, but so have the players. You know, honestly, I think there should be full pass marks to the team, the squad, the coaches, everyone associated with being in the trenches for this season, because going weekend, midweek to weekend, everything that they've done, honestly, I've not watched a game and thought Newcastle were rubbish, bad, you know, like, it's just been a bit of bad luck or a bit too much, you know, at different points of the year. So I think in terms of how the manager, the key moments of the season, the team, the squad, everything, I would give Newcastle a pass mark. I think they've held themselves in very good esteem, punched up, you know, not punched above their weight, but made their weight felt, you know, scoring 4 and 5 goals in a game really quite consistently throughout the season. And if you're going to be a top end team, that's the sort of improvement that we've seen with the league tables that was drastically needed. Newcastle had to get to the stage where scoring 3 and 4 or 5 goals isn't unusual or not possible. So I really do feel that given the exact obstacles and hurdles that they've faced, the ever-changing starting 11, injury availabilities and all the rest of it for different players, the fixture pile up, that I would give them all a pass mark. This has been one of my favourite sections to cover, and it is like the rising star. Who is a player that really did step out of the crowd and really make the biggest difference? And for me, it can only be the season of Anthony Gordon. I've said it time and time again, you add an INHO onto the end of his name and you double his price, you double the amount of people that are jaw-dropping, drooling over the guy. But he has been easily, for me, the most exciting, one of the best left forwards, left wingers in European football this year. He capped it off. He started the season off really well, winning the Youth Euros with England, obviously. And then this season, he has went from strength to strength. He has been a match winner time and time again for Newcastle, with goals, with assists, with running power, doing the dirty work, getting back defensively, and his ratings out of 100 across the season for all major statistics that Opta capture is consistently, for most games, above 70, which is fantastic and quite often could be a perfect 100. He's got that red card here, which maybe stopped him having a much better game against West Ham here. But this is a guy that has had a lot of shade. You know, like, is he worth the money? Is he the real deal? Are Newcastle putting a bit too much faith in him? And when we see the record from last year, for attacking output, there was definitely a lot of reason to suspect that Newcastle would need to find more goals from somewhere else. But he said, don't look anywhere else, it's here. And Anthony Gordon, honestly, is the absolute rising star of this team. Now, sadly, when some of the losses came early season, you can see he wasn't as effective, as influential. But as the season went on, he's got stronger, he's got quicker, he's got better. And the telepathy between him and Isak, like for me, they are the most dangerous pair in European football right now, is like a two. We've seen towards the end of the season a little bit more of a lean to having them as a counter-attacking two. Of course, Gordon loves to lean left, but we've seen him maybe come right side as well. And I think we're going to see a really big Euros at England for Anthony Gordon. Whether he gets a starting berth or not, we'll wait to see. But for me, he is clearly the rising star for the Newcastle season. And then we have the breakout star, you know, who is the guy that really came out of nowhere and made a big difference when it mattered the most. Now, there's no place in the two little awards that I do on the report card for Bruno Guimaraes or Alexander Isak, who I think have been phenomenal, amazing. Bruno Guimaraes has probably been the best standalone player in the Newcastle team, but I think we kind of knew that, which is why I give Gordon the rising star one, because I think he has really arrived on the scene as being a top elite end world-class attacking talent. And Alexander Isak is very close behind him in that reckoning for me, of course, in European football, and it just so happens they're at the same club. So it's a kind of close but no cigar for both of them. But for me, the breakout star this year has got to be Tino Livramento. I didn't really know too much about this kid coming into it, but he's had a good record from being a youth prospect and then going to Southampton for a lot of money. Newcastle spending a lot of money on him as well. And this guy, honestly, when I seen him in the flesh in the Man United game at St James's Park, he really impressed me because he's playing left back and right back, and he does look like he's been playing Premier League football for a couple of seasons. It looks like he's got not quite the slippers and the pipe out, you know, but he's not phased. He's not like out of his depth. He doesn't make like rookie mistakes or errors. And defensively, he always looks after the rest of the team. And for a guy that's been called upon at key points of the season and not being ever present because of Kieran Trippier playing in his position of right back, and then like, you know, sometimes he played left back like we mentioned, and you know, he didn't have a consistent year all round. But as you can see with his ratings out of 100 here for the season, there's like half a dozen games here where he has been the difference maker. You know, he's been a big part of Newcastle's success and getting victories over the line, whether it be from what he's doing defensively or offensively. And I do feel that this is a player who deserves to be like the breakout star of this team. Lewis Miley, it was very exciting this year to see him pop through into the starting 11 and fill the gaps and carry the water when it was needed. And Elliot Anderson, I think, made a big difference to the midfield when he came back to fitness towards the end of the year. But for the whole season from start to finish, I think Tino Livramento has to be Newcastle's breakout star of the season. And then this takes us on to the squad. Where do we find the team now? What's the to-do list? What's the summary for, you know, what have we learned from the 23-24 season coming into the summer for Newcastle? You know, what are their expectations for next year? How should they be behaving in the transfer market? What are the missing pieces of the puzzle, as it were? And this is the team as we find it now. Well, I've got the guys in grey that didn't really feature this season. I've put Tonali in best 11 because he's just going to walk back in there now. We know that. But Richie, a peripheral figure alongside Dummett and Target. And really, this is a very, very thin squad if you look at it and you see everyone's actual appearance count. There's not many players that really break into 20, 25 starts across the year. And like I said with the earlier segments of this video, it doesn't look that much stronger than the season before, considering how much money get put into it. Hall being the backup come first choice left back. Livramento, who we've spoken about, the breakout star, and Tonali with that ban. Barnes was injured. But the good thing is everyone who's been there for the last couple of seasons is, you know, the synergy, the chemistry in the team, whatever you want to call it, is definitely getting stronger and deeper. And we do see that, you know, like that is kind of forged in the trenches when the going is tough. You've got tough periods of the season, tough games where you turn around and get the result, the Group of Death Champions League. So, you know, although on paper the team isn't any stronger than the year before, and it still kind of needs a lot of work done to it to get it back to being a top four, you know, reckoning side, there is fantastic foundations here to be built upon. Now, Newcastle seem to be quite busy already in the market, and they're looking to sign some free transfers. They're looking to bring in Lloyd Kelly on a free transfer from Eddie Howe's former club Bournemouth. And I don't know how to feel about this. Is this going to be Kelly coming in to play with Hall as left back, and then Byrne maybe becomes a more residual player in the squad, perhaps? Botman's injury crisis and history is obviously becoming more and more of a headache. So maybe it's just further insurance for this left-hand side of the pitch, which already has a number of players in it. And also another free agent from Fulham, Tosin Adebayo, who's a very well-decorated England youth international, former Man City youth prospect, thought to be like the next player that could come in as a first-team player to Man City in defence. Obviously, that's not the way it's panned out, but done very, very well at Fulham. Has a lot of suitors around the Premier League. And for Kelly and Tosin Adebayo to come in on free transfers is brilliant moneyball play from Newcastle and the team there. And I love the fact that they're trying to get these moves done early, because if you add these two guys in, like, Newcastle's defence looks fantastically stronger than it is last season, and compared to a lot of other teams in the league. With no midweek football, they really should have an embarrassment of riches of defenders available to them, and that could unlock the key to getting the 22-23 defensive record back. Now, I made a wee bit of a faux pas with this because we've got Mamardashvili already on page. Now, it does sound like Pope isn't really as favoured or might be on his way out, and Dubravka does look to be on his way out, and Mamardashvili is in a distressed situation. Valencia need revenue. They need to sell players to make money. They've been really relying on their academy players this year. They've been a bit of a downward spiral for a few years now. This guy's been linked to Atletico Madrid and Newcastle, and for me, if Newcastle are in the fray for Giorgio Mamardashvili, they should be getting him. He's a fantastic goalkeeper, really good young prospect, and a guy that you can build this defence around for the next couple of seasons, no doubt about it. And the transfer fee might not be too eye-watering considering Valencia's situation, and, you know, if it is between Newcastle and Atletico Madrid, these clubs, obviously Newcastle have restrictions on them, but traditionally aren't like mad spenders, so I don't think Valencia will be able to really take the piss with the bidding war and try and play each other off each other for too long, you know. But if he does go to Atletico Madrid, that does open the door for Jan Oblak to leave Atletico Madrid, and I'm not really too sure where an obvious place for him to be. I'd maybe think it's Juventus or Newcastle. I'd rather have Oblak than Mamardashvili, so let's watch out for that one. But if this defence can get buttoned up and, you know, whatever the business is going to be done sooner rather than later, then I think Newcastle give themselves a great head start coming into the actual summer transfer window. Will they be able to sell anyone? Do they have to sell anyone to maybe relieve a little bit of pressure? I'm not too sure. But with some of the rule changes that have happened, I've got a feeling that they're going to make it a bit easier for Newcastle to round off some of these edges. To be honest with you, with Tonali back in the building, Anderson showing us what he can do, the emergence of Miley, and then just having Willock and Longstaff around, the midfield for no midweek football is probably going to be good enough and probably going to get by more weeks than not. We even seen Lewis Hall play a bit of midfield, and that was very impressive to me as well, to see his ability in that position, and that he is that, you know, he's that good at such a young age. So there's some options here. I would like to see a midfielder come into the Newcastle team here, and I'm talking about a guy that's probably of the level of an Elliot Anderson, but maybe you're picking up a guy from a relegated club or a club that, like maybe Nottingham Forest, for example, who are really distressed financially and really need to sell somebody. Could you get a player like in that situation on a cut price that you know is Premier League proven, definitely isn't going to be annoyed seeing Joe Linton, Bruno and Tonali starting like 90% of the time, but if something happened to one of them, because all three of these guys play the same role. They all play the number 8. They all go box to box and line to line. So having another guy that could come in and help carry the burden for the coming season as well as the future, I think has got to be of huge priority after you've seen how weak the midfield could be at points this season. Now, Geordies were giving me a hard time in the summer saying a guy like Lukaku would have been a fantastic signing for Newcastle, and I stand by that. Wilson really did well this year when he was fit and available, but I think we've seen his injury record is not getting better as time goes on. So there's definitely more firepower needed. As long as Barnes can stay fit, there's really no need for any more left attackers, certainly. And with Almiron, he could be a guy that's Alan Saint-Maximin, let's just say, which leaves then, if Almiron stays, it's not as pressing, but there is a big hole on this right-hand side here, because Murphy is like not good enough to get you into European football, and Ritchie is barely used. And with Minty coming back in on loan from Feyenoord, who was very, very good in the Champions League and in the Eredivisie, I think he gives a little bit of depth here, but it's really hard to, you know, put the thrust on him and say, oh yeah, he could just replace Almiron, or, oh, we've got him and Almiron, we're fine. So I do feel that although there's room for another striker in this team, I'd like to see another winger come in here. If somebody can play both sides, that's brilliant, but I think Barnes and Gordon have a bit of that in their locker, so maybe somebody that could be like a right-sided specialist would make the biggest difference to this Newcastle best 11 and overall squad depth. Although I think Newcastle have regressed this year, I do think their transfer window for last summer and the January were hard fails. I do believe that because of the team, because of Eddie Howe, Tyndall, the coaching staff, the actual squad they've got there, they have made some real on-pitch improvements, developments this year. And Newcastle, not having the burden of midweek football this year, really could set themselves up now in a real springboard fashion to go from here and be a success season on season, after having like the season above expectations, having that wee taste of Champions League this year, to the disappointment of not being ready for that yet and feeling it kind of crumble around you. This could be the kind of lessons that, you know, the die is cast in the wool. They've learned the lessons. They know what they need to do. They've got a better idea of it. And from here forth, Newcastle go on to be a dominant top 4, top 5, depending on how many Champions League places are handed out, Premier League team. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. I'm looking forward to catching the comment section on this one to see what your big takeaways are from the report card. What would you add on to it? Is there anything I've overlooked on screen? And now some other stuff I've made YouTube thinks you might enjoy. Stay out of trouble, and I'll catch you on the next one.